All right, well, welcome. It's good to see you both. And hi, everyone out there. My name is Jen Lewis Walden. I'm an advisor with Build Healthy Places Network, a national center that fosters cross-sector collaboration across healthcare, finance, and public health to accelerate community-centered investments in racial equity. BHPN uplifts ideas and examples from the field of innovative cross-sector work to make communities healthier. I'm really excited to welcome my two guests today for this video snapshot, highlighting practitioners that are advancing projects that are community-led and owned. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Tap Bui, co-executive director of Song Community Development Corporation based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Tap's work as part of Song is part of the Build Healthy Places Network Community Innovations for Racial Equity program. The initiative was launched last year, supporting 10 BIPOC-led CDCs across the country for their unique place-based efforts in building community power and exploring community ownership models. I'm also joined by Sonia Sarkar, my colleague on the leadership team of Shift Health Accelerator, and also who co-led the project that we'll be discussing today, spearheaded by Common Future, to shift the billions of dollars of philanthropic assets held in investments into more participatory, community-owned approaches and projects. Sonia facilitated a cohort of philanthropic investment leaders from foundations across the country to bring more participatory processes to their respective foundations, as well as an initiative to pool $175,000 in investment capital to test participatory investment models and create actionable tools for the field for other institutions to do more participatory work. And Sonia is continuing to test these participatory investing ideas in the healthcare space with Shift Health Accelerator. And TAP was an advisor on the Common Future Participatory Investing Project. And TAP offered particularly wise insights on how funders and institutional players can think about trust building, democratizing resources, and reconceptualizing a funding process that really centers community vision, priorities, and insights to deepen investing across the field. So I'm excited to have them here. Tap, let's start with your work. Can you share more about Song CDC and the work you're spearheading in New Orleans East, and what kind of community ownership models are you all exploring?
Hi, my name is Tap Bui, and again, I'm the co-executive director of Song Community Development Corporation here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Our mission is rooted in the Vietnamese experience, but works for the liberation of all BIPOC communities to increase their quality of life. So as a community development corporation, we have the ability to multi-serve across many issues, but our core focuses has always been environmental justice, affordable housing, how to live with water, right? Healthcare access. And so things that come up generally from our conversations with residents on what their top priorities and what their top needs are. We're really rooted in looking at how equity inform not only the work that we look at internally, but how outward facing projects, development is really addressing the root causes of issues and really working across multi-generational residents and cross-organizing. So for us, community ownership looks at like land trust, right? Like being able to control parcels of land that community members can take ownership and have a voice on what they want to be developed. Right now, we have a local food cooperative called Veggie Farmers Cooperative that looks at reimagining the local food justice system, but also as a workforce initiative for residents, to combat livable wages, but also looking at like healthy food access. I think for us, a long stretch goal of what a community ownership model could look like would be community-based microfinance institutions, right? So having the ability to support other like-minded, values-aligned, mission-aligned organizations, gain access to capital or whatever it is to develop the work that they want to do. And we don't see, a lot of that investments in BIPOC communities. I think we see some community development financial institutions, but I think on the community-based microfinancing level, that's a space and a void that we can potentially fill.
Great, thank you for that. And Sonia, can you introduce yourself and share more about the Common Future Participatory Investing Project, the origins of the toolkit that was produced, how it was created, and what it intends to offer for the field?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. It's good to be here with you and good to be here with TAP. I'm Sonia Sarkar. I am on the leadership team of Shift Health Accelerator and based in Boston. I also was previously a social entrepreneur in residence with Common Future, and they, as an organization that has done a lot of work around creative capital vehicles and different strategies to really bridge the racial wealth gap and think about supporting BIPOC entrepreneurs and grassroots organizations, we're really curious to bring together a cohort focused on both learning and then also operationalizing this concept of participatory investing. So as we know in the field, there has started to be some activity, at least on the institutional side, with philanthropic organizations around this concept of participatory grant making and thinking about ways that communities are actually directly making decisions about where dollars should go and how those should be exercised and overseen. But there's all of this other money that we know that exists in financial institutions like foundations and other institutions that often gets invested into the markets. And what would it look like for communities to also have a voice and a say in what takes place with those investments? So that's really where the Participatory Investing Action Lab that Common Future was spearheading came into play. And as you mentioned, Jen, we brought together a bunch of foundations to explore this topic. And really, the origins of the toolkit came out of the fact that when we brought this cohort together, there's a lot of questions around, like, what do we mean by participatory investing, and what are the different components of that, and how do we define community? What does it look like to actually set up processes where community members can both have transparency into what investing is taking place or what it looks like at a philanthropic institution, but also, what are all of the stages of an investment strategy, and how do you think about bringing true sort of community engagement and learning and eventually sort of governance processes to how all of that works? So the toolkit was really intended to be a capture of a lot of the learning, the tools, the exercises that we got to actually experiment with in the cohort. And I should say that in addition to learning and learning about and defining participatory investing, this cohort was also engaged in an actual practice project. So each institution that was part of the cohort had to institute a participatory investing pilot or starting point inside of their own institution. They also had to come together to contribute to a pooled fund that was then intended to be a participatory fund where both the foundations as well as community leaders that we actually brought in through Shift and through programs like this one, I know Tap, you're a part of that, were able to then inform what that fund became and how those decisions were made and what got invested in. So the toolkit has really been a place to put all of that together and provide some modules and some curriculum and some content that other philanthropic institutions can experiment with as well, and hopefully use to build the field and seed more cases of participatory investing.
That's great. Thank you for that synopsis of the project. And Tap, I want to bring you in because you were one of the advisors on the Participatory Investing Project, and we sourced a handful, probably 10 or 12 community advisors doing diverse work across the country to help inform the philanthropic participants of this cohort in terms of what would it look like to do their investing in a different way. And one of the ideas that you put forward that I thought was particularly compelling and really sort of shifted the frame of the foundation folks that were participating was you outlined an idea of sort of flipping the funding dynamics on its head, and you were describing the ways that typical funding that is applying an equity lens goes outside, external to the foundation, where funders are looking to community members to inform priorities or needs that they're seeing in communities. And you offered an alternative point of view where community leaders and residents would inform the internal grant-making, decision-making that's often out of reach or not visible to community leaders. I'm just curious what you think might be possible if more of these types of more internally focused equitable processes and participatory methods were applied in the funding world.
Yeah, I dream of a world where there's trust based grant making that is really rooted in the community experiences, because we know that the communities are the experts of their own needs and are capable of making informed decisions. And I think that narrative has been lost for a lot of funders and grant makers. In particular, I think it's important to note that the role of grant makers is to really support the work, but oftentimes we also see funders go into the space of solving issues, right? When it should be communities that are more than capable of, making decisions and being able to solve and being able to know what's best for them. So I think this notion of just piloting a participatory grant making process should really be expanded to just like that is what they should do, because I think a lot of ways the funding world has taken many progressive steps forward in terms of like identifying what their core values are and what they want to address, but has taken generation steps backwards in terms of like what their goal and what they're here for, what they're here to serve. And that's to invest in communities that know how to solve their own issues. So that's the world I imagine and I hope will come to fruition in the next few years. I think, with looking at systems that are equitable, I think that's where we begin, is really involving community resonance at every single stage of a grant making process, and not just coming to communities and taking away from their knowledge and their experiences and developing a process that's supposed to be for them but not involve them. And we see that through multitudes of levels, right, from government to foundations to local funders. So if there's an opportunity to really embed communities into this grant making process, I think that's where, we can really dream of a world that trust is built, transparency is built, and to really like go hand in hand and solve, what's most needed in the community.
That's great. Thank you for that. I want to build on that, and Sonia, bring you in because I think the Common Future Project, the Participatory Investing Project, really tried to surface and identify some of the sticking points for more equitable, community-driven processes in the investment, philanthropic investment process. And you all surfaced a number of learnings around reframing risk and return, and other components of more equitable investing processes. I'm curious if you can describe some of the leading edge ideas in this space that you would really want investors to consider in terms of really shifting both the narrative as well as the practice.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Tap was sharing about the role of grant makers, foundations, impact investors, and them really understanding how they can support and kind of be in service of communities with lived experience rather than necessarily trying to create a lot of additional infrastructure. And so when I think about leading edge ideas in this space, if we kind of zoom all the way out and think about where dollars exist in our system and, kind of the creation of a lot of philanthropic and financial institutions. And when we try to think about what it means to seek return on an investment in the first place, we know that there are pretty extractive systems that norm has come from. And particularly if we're trying to invest in endeavors or enterprises that are run by communities that have been hurt by that economic extraction, we have to really tie questions of return on investment to the ways that we think about reparations, to the ways that we think about community wealth building, to the ways that we think about, just ensuring that there is actual restoration of, a lot of what has happened over time. And so particularly coming out of the Participatory Investment Action Lab, I think there were a few ideas that were really surfaced by the community advisors that we worked with. So one of them, for example, was that there might be an opportunity to rethink who the return is coming to. So particularly in the healthcare space, just as an example, many of the institutions that are part of these types of processes are nonprofit institutions. They are asking for a return sort of in this traditional financial norm and system, but could there be an opportunity instead to think about the return coming in the form of health outcomes, which these institutions are also on the hook for, and those outcomes really being embedded in community? And so rather than needing solely a financial return, there could be a joint return, or there could be an emphasis really placed on the health return. There were also some ideas about pay it forward. So what does it look like to invest in different types of community-oriented opportunities that are then resulting in additional community wealth, or additional kind of like just larger kind of financial building for the communities that they're serving, and for that to be the return, right? Rather than the dollars having to go back to the original institution. So I think that there's a number of different ways to think about these concepts. Oftentimes they feel very immutable, but we humans created those concepts. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to also play with them. And a lot of folks are already doing that, whether they're at community-owned funds or at organizations like Song CDC or others, just really thinking about how to be creative about the capital vehicles that we have, and then what that means for investors and their role in that.
Thanks, Sonia. Tap, I want to ask you a very similar question and get your thoughts on this notion of returns. And, as you were talking as an advisor to this project, you were really naming the kind of tension between a return that an investor might be seeking and the kind of impact that you all are generating, and that being out of sync and out of alignment with one another. And I'm just curious how you would want investors, funders to think about return, as well as the impact that your work is making in the field.
Thank you. And then, Sonia, I really appreciate your, points around reparations and how we capture that in terms of as a data point for investors and funders. We tend to look on the side of what does the impact of this fund address in terms of social capital, right? So showing how relationships are being built and strengthened amongst residents, amongst collaborators, and then showing the sense of unity and shared responsibility. So I think social capital, social and human capital, is not talked enough in terms of returns on investments. We need to start talking about what it means for equity and inclusion and how to capture that data, right? I don't think we have a common understanding of equity, so that there in itself is an issue, because if we don't have a common definition for it, it's hard for us to get on the same page of what that would look like in terms of community. So I think community residents are also equipped to know what equity and inclusion looks like. So looking at how, for example, BIPOC residents interact with each other, right? Who's showing up in spaces that have not allowed them to in the past. Showing how diversity, right, and traditionally marginalized voices are being heard and seen. So I think those are types of returns on investments that can also be captured. And then I think community resilience. We talk about resilience a lot, right? Especially here in Louisiana after, hurricanes and natural disasters, man-made disasters. And I think there's a lot of funding out there that's driving resilience work, right? But I think it's all around disaster preparedness and how to get people more engaged in resilient efforts. But, what are we looking at to showcase how an individual becomes resilient in the face of challenges, right? How programs address mental and well-being, because I think that's all a part of a community's resilience. And lastly, the return on investment needs to not just look at this generation, but multi-generational impact, right? What are the things that we're doing today that will impact in the long term, families and lives for generations to come. So I think we're sometimes stuck in this bucket of what kind of impact can we see today with this demographic, but not really measure what the long-term results or outcomes could look like for generations to come.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I mean, I just want to underscore some of the ideas that you surfaced around long-term trust building and relationship building, investing in social capital as a means to create healthy communities, a pay it forward where there's a mutuality involved in the investment and where those dollars could go to amplify wealth, ownership, health outcomes. So just really appreciate the insight that you both are offering around what could this generate, this type of work that is community driven generate? So just for the final question, I want to ask you both, just in an imagination space, in 5 years, in 10 years, if we're successful in advancing more participatory community owned funding and investing practices across philanthropy, across impact investing, across healthcare investing, where might we be? Sonia, I can start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to see so much more money in the hands of folks with lived experience and the kind of most creative solutions about what they think their people need and, what they would like to see happen. I think in particular, what I'm really excited about is as we think about just norms in the sector or norms in the field across philanthropy and impact investing and healthcare, I would love for folks to really come to reckon with the idea that you can't have a racial equity strategy or a health equity strategy without directly grappling with where community members sit in your decision making about some of your largest pots of money, because that is so fundamentally tied to racial capitalism in our country, and it's just so fundamentally tied to how we're actually going to push back on the inequities that we see. It's not just about what we're investing in, it's very much about how we're making those investments in the first place. And so I think having more stories that are speaking to that, more norms where institutions are actually pressuring one another to do this work, and it's not just community organizations or folks like us who have to kind of convince them that this is a good idea. And then I think that the other thing that I'd love to see to build on this piece about long-term relationship building is that there are multi-year initiatives in place where institutions and community organizations are really getting to know one another and having to navigate through messy conversations, hard conversations, because all of this is still undefined. So that's kind of how we move forward in it.
I wholeheartedly agree with Sonia around making this practice a norm and not just something that they do for one time or have a small percentage of their funding go to this type of pooled investing. I imagine and envision a world where predatory grant making practices will stop. That includes, traditional grant making activities like submitting a 990 or, financial audits and things like that. That these are barriers to individuals that lead organizations with actual lived experiences that can tell you how they can do the work and how they can be really impactful with all of these barriers and bureaucracy that they have to step to before even being granted an amount of money that may or may not impact the work that they do. I would love to see multi-year funding. I think to Sonia's point, I think one-time funding is usually not enough to continue the work that we do in the community. But I also want to capture a wider lens of not just participatory grant making for foundations, but looking at other types of investments and pools within the foundations or organizations itself. I don't think we talk enough about the harmful practices of donor advised funds and how much of that money sits there and how much of that could be really invested back into the community. So I think it takes for a radical reimagining of how foundations are traditionally set up to really be more progressive and more responsive to those with lived experiences and needs on a community level. So that's what I envision for the future.
That's great. Well, just really appreciate both of your voices in this space and the radical reimagining, not just for the 10-year horizon, but right now in real time for the work that you all will continue to do in our partnership in this space. So thank you both for participating in this video snapshot series, and we will look forward to continuing to collaborate.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.